I'd like to invite members of the audience who have questions for any of our panelists to come up to either of these microphones.
This question is for Wendell Berry. I read with great interest Silas House's entries and posts on Facebook in 2011 about your occupancy of the governor's office in terms of that mountaintop removal issue. And I really haven't seen much about it since then. I was just wondering if there are any further developments or if you're still involved with that issue.
Oh, there's nothing to be done about our governor. He's got people enrolling in the health care law, and that's to his credit. That's a good thing, and he got the state wound up and the technicians involved and got it done, and people are signing up down there at about 1,000 a day. So that's to his credit. But the political reality of Kentucky is that there's a party of coal and a party of everything else. And the governor is of the party of coal. Mitch McConnell is of the party of coal. Both of his opponents are of the party of coal. So there it is. But we did go up there with the intention of doing a nonviolent civil disobedience thing that would put us in jail. And I don't want to go to jail. I want you to understand that we were at another protest in Washington about strip mining and climate change and so on, and some wizard with a microphone asked me if I wanted to go to jail. I said, hell no. There's a difference between wanting to go and being willing to go if you have to. But anyway, we were resolved. This is one of the best things activism ever did get, if that's what it is, to get me into. The governor outsmarted us. He invited us to spend the weekend in his reception room. And we did. And we had a wonderful time. I mean, we were really united in that, and I came out of that really loving a number of my allies. I mean, in a way I hadn't before. There's a number of moving things happened, but somebody in Florida sent us a bunch of pizzas. People were sending food and bedclothes to us. We had a long table out in the hallway outside the governor's office, covered up with food all the time we were in there. And we were inviting the security staff over, and they'd come sit with us and eat. And I remember one of us said to the security people one day, "You've got a nice capital here," or something to that effect. He said, it's not our capital, it's your capital. The upshot, of course, is that nothing good came of it, except we had a nice weekend. But then I have to tell that sometime later, a fairly lengthy time later, we went back up there, and there'd been a sit-in in the governor's office every Thursday, ever since we did that. School kids, and so on. And when the actual bunch of us turned up for a meeting with the Attorney General or his subordinates, we went to the governor's office again, and we did the Thursday sit-in. And all the doors opened into the waiting room from the governor's various subordinates. And they all came out to greet us. They were glad to see us. We behaved ourselves really beautifully. I was so proud of the way we behaved and the way we looked and so on. And when we left, I mean, we had lint on our tongues. We'd cleaned that office. It was perfect. And so all these people, including the governor's state patrolman, came out to tell us how glad they were to see us back. That's very, very nice, very nice. Utterly useless, but nice.
Great,
And
why don't we go over
eventually,
to-
you know, this,
sorry.
something will come of that.
Sorry to interrupt. You were next, so why don't you ask your question?
My question is for Mr. Johnson. How did you know that all of your information was correct?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And thank you for it. I don't. North Korea is a place where almost nothing is verifiable or confirmable. I don't even know if the North Koreans know the truth of their society. Do they have a census of their 23 million people? I mean, we have to guess at how many people live in the country. Do they track births and deaths? Are they like other totalitarian societies and have very accurate statistics and monitoring of people? Or is it localized in the provinces? We don't know how many people are born, how they die, their health conditions. They don't have a census. They don't seem to give any reliable information about themselves. And the only information we have really comes from satellite images, which take interpretation, and human intelligence from people who escape. And people tend to only defect from certain regions, and they tend to be very traumatized people who have been under very harsh conditions. And so the stories we get are often very terrible stories, but maybe aren't representative of normal people there. I think that's one thing. A portrait of North Korea from the defectors is a very skewed one towards desperation. And I think there's a large group of fairly normal people in North Korea that don't choose to take that big risk. And we don't hear their stories. For journalists, they can't confirm any of these stories. Even the ones that seem reliable, only in aggregate can we feel confident with a portrait. But for a fiction writer, I don't have to confirm anything. Their dreams, their fears, rumors, legends, myths, tales, unreliable stories are especially useful to me, to build the psychological portrait. That's what I tried to make. And the country's a mystery-generating machine. And after studying North Korea for almost a decade, I feel like I have more questions than when I began, though they're specific rather than general.
And could I just ask you briefly, just factually, how did you go about meeting defectors? I'm just curious how you did that.
Oh, well, here's, the fact that I'm not an activist. I know a lot of people who write about North Korea who go to the Yalu and Tumen River, who embrace people who defect in southern China. I know writers who go to Hanwon in South Korea, where the North Korean defectors, go when they make it to the south. I'm a father and a teacher and a writer, and I didn't go do these things, And I did not go out and embrace, defectors in China and in South Korea. I used the work of activists and their field stories, which are available online in countless numbers, actually. And I encourage you to go read the story of a defector. They're often taken by NGO workers, various aid worker organizations. There's a facility in South Korea called Hanwon that takes the stories of every North Korean that makes it to the South. And missionaries actually are doing what should be the political work of nations to a large degree. And they have a vested interest in telling the stories of North Koreans. And so, I couldn't go into the field to do that. I used the work of others.
Right. Thank you. You have a question here now?
This is a question for Brian.
To you, what was the most interesting thing that the soldiers carried in Vietnam that you discovered when you were there, or that you wrote about?
Oh, okay. I don't have an answer to this. In a way, that question is way too broad for me. I can speak for myself, and what was most interesting to me was I carried to Vietnam, or to war in general, an image of myself as a decent, civilized human being. Kid from southern Minnesota who believed in God and his country and in himself, and was betrayed on all levels, including by myself. So I carried a young man to Vietnam who one day found himself at the bottom of an irrigation ditch, deep in the slime of a war, which was embodied for me by that ditch, the algae and the leeches and the excrement, listening to people die all around me, yelling, "Dear Jesus, dear Jesus," and the yipping sounds of dying Vietnamese. And you emerge from the ditch of war as a different human being, and you carry that human being with you through the remainder of your days. I carried with me to Vietnam a suspicion that war in general, not just that war, but war in general, is a losing proposition. That I often, in fact, last night at this beautiful cocktail party we were all attending, I was wearing a white shirt with a tie, and on the tab of the white shirt were the words "Made in Vietnam" that my wife had purchased for me at a J.C. Penney's in Austin, Texas. Wars are billed to us as pending catastrophes. If we lose, we're losing something big, and it's usually framed in political terms, national honor, national interest. Catastrophe? When 40 years later you're coming to Dayton to a beautiful occasion such as this, wearing a J.C. Penney shirt that says "Made in Vietnam." Catastrophe with tourists going through that country, relations normalized. And then you pose against that white shirt 3 million dead people in Vietnam and 59,000 dead Americans. And then you heap on top of that the orphans and the widows, the kids who never knew their parents. Down in Orlando, Florida, right now, there is a 95-year-old black woman who at 2 a.m. every night wakes up and says, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" And her baby has been dead 40 years. And so it's not just the burdens that I as a soldier carry from a war, it's the burdens carried by Mrs. Merrick's, looking for her kid for 40 years, her dead kid. The last thing I want to say about the question has to do with just what we're all here for, that there is that word peace that appears in this occasion, and we're all here in different ways circling it. Peace is a shy thing. It does not brag about itself. We're at peace in this room, but I don't think anybody in this room, myself certainly included, walked in here thinking, "Oh good, I'm at peace, I'm at peace." Because it's shy and doesn't announce itself. And hence is taken for granted until a time comes in one's life, whether it's in a formal war or a war in a bedroom or a war between a father and a son, that its absence is known, but it's known only through its absence. When you have gunfire all around you, you're at the bottom of that ditch. Peace takes on a value you just don't feel in the normal circumstances of our lives, because the wolf is not at the door, it's not yipping at you, threatening to grab you by the throat. So that's an approximation of an answer for what I took to the war and how I've been changed and what I'm carrying out of the war. Best I can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now we're going to go back over to this side of the room. You've been waiting a while, I know.
Hi, since we're speaking about advocacy, the written word in newspapers and books, newspapers, reading, it's all, in our opinion, from our viewpoint, endangered in society. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I might be an optimist here, and maybe it's also the presence of how many people are here. And whenever I go to festivals and conferences, what I notice from audiences are how engaged they are in the written word and in literature. The fact that if newspapers are getting smaller, if space for certain things seems to be progressively shrinking, what people seem to be doing is going to books and to literature to look for these stories that are not getting told in other venues. Maybe as a bookseller, you are noticing that publishing is not putting out as many books, but what I seem to find, I think the books are there. Maybe the question is also the types of books that start, that there seems to be a cycle. Publishing seems to suddenly, you know, a decade ago, we had all these stories coming out from Chinese writers or China, Indian, now we have African. There's my sense, if I am in any way, if I have a finger on the pulse of what might be coming up next, I seem to be reading a lot of student theses of Tibet. You know, and I'm wondering if it's not that things are shrinking, but the focus seems to narrow. But I do think that festivals like this give us an opportunity to broaden the types of discussions that we have, the way that we see the books can connect with each other. I know that's not answering your question, but again, I think I'm a little more optimistic. Well, people have always said the book is about to die, right? And someone told me when the books came in book form the first time, we moved from scrolls. You know, the scrolls were going to die. The written word was going to die. So maybe it doesn't matter what format it's in. Maybe it's the fact that we are still continuing to read. I don't know. I'd love to hear what somebody has to say.
As someone who's worked in media all my life, that's true. I mean, we don't have, people thought plays would die when movies came. People thought art would die when photography came, and it hasn't happened. So let's go here.
The question is, I'm young, like, compared to some of these people in the audience. I don't know. I mean, but I'm naive. I'm very naive. And I wanted to know how you got to where you are, because sometimes I feel that it's almost impossible to make such a difference, and where do you start, and how do you get your voice and the voices of other people heard in this way? And so I was wondering, how did you, this is just sort of a blanket question, how did you achieve that?
Anybody want to go on that one? If not, I'm going to call on Gilbert, because we haven't heard.
Oh, I'll just say, I'll just use myself as an example, because I think it sort of might fit. I feel very much in common with you, actually. So, you know, a few months ago, well, maybe it's about a year ago, I had written this book, and I couldn't get it reviewed anywhere. It was just very hard to get off the ground. It was considered African-American history, not the most commercial type of book. But I even had an indication from my publisher that, you know, good luck with this. It's going to be a really tough sell. And I didn't care. I said, you know what? I love this story so much. I'm just going to keep going at it. I burned through my advance. I had a really low advance. And it took me almost 5 years to write this. And I really didn't care. I just said, I'm going to commit to this story. I just think it's great. Maybe the people aren't there, but I'm going to make it as good as I can. And I felt like I did that. And then at the end, I got the indication that not a lot of people were going to buy this book. And I said, you know what? I still like writing. It's too bad. I'm starting to learn this craft a little bit, and it's too bad that might be my last book ever because the sales might be low. And I literally went to mystery conventions and talked to writers about how to change your name and how, you know, I know how to write. I just can't sell anything with my name anymore. But I got a great gift, but I think the gift and the luck that came with winning a big prize, it all started from just believing in something and just committing to it and just saying, I don't really care what happens with this story. I just want to tell it the best way I can. And that's the sort of lesson I have. I was naive too. I really, didn't know what I was doing at some point. I thought, I'm going to write mysteries the rest of my life. And it's too bad because I really like writing this kind of story. But just committing to it and just seeing where it takes you. I think that's the best thing I could possibly say.
Thanks. I can't resist telling a story some of you may know because it was written up in the Times, but Gilbert had actually been told the day before he won the Pulitzer that his book was being remaindered because they'd given up on it. So don't give up hope, folks. Now let's hear from you.
First of all, I want to congratulate all of you for the work of advocacy and activism that you did, and thank you for letting us, your readers, see the world beyond just our little bubble here in Siberia, Kettering. Thank you very much. But my question is, I guess you guys are accomplished, as you said before, advocate and activism. And how would you suggest we, as the readers, I guess, go beyond just reading your book and feeling empowered with it and become activists ourselves and do something about all the problems in the world that you guys talked about in your book?
What's the question?
We got a volunteer here? It's a great question.
Well, I would say that the first thing to do is to get other people to read the book. Form of activism that's very attractive. But beyond that, I think that all of us are trying to write about worlds that we feel have been inadequately exposed and explored. And it would be great to feel that, and I don't mean arrogantly to speak for my fellow panelists, but I think it would be great to feel like people who read the books are able to enter into those worlds a little bit. Certainly in terms of my book, I feel like if it allows people to be kinder to people who are different in some way, then it's achieved a goal. And I think fantastic if if you wanted to become a real activist within one of the areas, if you wanted to get more involved in fighting for race rights, or more involved in looking at land issues, or looking at our international relations, then I think that would be fantastic. But an awful lot of it really is just to have a greater consciousness of what goes on and of the injustice in the world, and to try to reach it in whatever way you can. There's not a sort of formulaic, I could say to you, go and join this organization, here's the website and so on, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a shift in consciousness, and I think that happens by sharing any change that you've felt with others, and then by joining the organizations or getting involved with the organizations that are implied in a lot of what all of us have written.
I think you were next.
Maaza, would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about Girl Rising and your role in it?
Yes, I will. Girl Rising is a documentary that came out in March of this year, and I had the privilege of being a writer on it. And the documentary is told in 9 segments and tells the stories of 9 different girls who in their own way overcame an obstacle to get an education or the story of their attempt to get an education. So the stories are girls from Afghanistan, from India, from Nepal, from Ethiopia, from Haiti, Sierra Leone, Peru, and I can't remember the last one. But I was privileged enough to work on the story of this young girl from Ethiopia, and Meryl Streep, I have to say, did the voice for this, so that was great. And I talked to a lot. I went to Ethiopia. I went into the countryside. I spoke and met with a lot of young girls who had been forced to get married at the age of 8 or 9 or 10 or 11. Ethiopia has one of the highest rates of forced early marriage. And aside from the very physical damage that happens to, and psychological damage that happens to these young girls who are forced to do this, that also stops their education, and really they're confined. They become prisoners to the home of this husband in many ways. There's no other thing to do but to cook and clean and have kids. I spent time with one young girl who refused to go through with this marriage at 12. And what that meant, and what I found incredibly courageous and uplifting, was that she said no when no one else was saying no. When her mother had married at probably 10 or 11, when her grandmother had been married at 10 or 11, when all her aunts had been married, it was a cultural, traditional thing, and she had kind of this idea that this isn't right. So I followed her for a while, and I had an opportunity to talk to her mother and her grandparents and her aunt. And for those of you who have seen the documentary, what emerged for me, and that was most profound, was that her brother was also someone who stepped up and stood next to her and said, no, I will sell everything I own in this world so that my sister can continue in school. And I asked him, why did you do this? And he said, because when I was 6, I had to drop out of school to take care of the farm, and there's nothing more I've ever wanted than an education. He said, but my sister will have it. And that's a level of courage and generosity that I find profound. And so that's the story that I share in the documentary. And through working with the filmmakers and the producers, I've met some of the other young girls from Nepal, Cambodia, and their stories. If you haven't seen it, there are schools and universities and organizations that are able to bring this. It's incredible. But what I found most inspiring about this, and the reason that I agreed to do the documentary, was that I felt for one of the first times this was a film that was portraying it wasn't portraying Westerners as reaching out a helping hand to these tragic people. The young girl whose story I wrote made this change on her own, all alone, before the cameras got there. She did this first. She forced hope in before we walked into her village. And all these girls in the documentary have done that. And it's I think, a different way of telling a story of other people in developing countries, that there are actually changes happening before the rest of us step in and decide to publicize that. Asmara. The girl's name that I wrote was Asmara.
The name of the documentary.
Girl Rising.
Ms. Berry, I come from a Kentucky lineage, and so I'm proud of you from that angle. And also, your words have changed my life over and over again, beautifully. I'm really grateful. So your writing has made this huge difference for me, and you're a touchstone and a talisman for me. And I carry your books with me when I'm sad or frightened, and they change things for me. How awesome is that? But also, I thought maybe there were, maybe briefly with 3 or 4 words, all of you would say what writing has changed your lives, and then, kind of like you're supposed to talk to your boss's boss if you want to advance. Maybe I could hear from you who you go to as readers. So I don't know if you have time or interest, but I'd like to hear the answer to that.
Great, so we start with you, Adam, and just work down the panel here, if you guys would give us a short answer at least.
Well, the people who've changed my lives are mentors, writers who took me under their wing for whatever reason and helped me craft my work and find my voice. So my answer would be people rather than books, though there were books that taught me how big a vision of a book could be, whether it was a novel like Possession or Donald Lowe's Libra or Moby Dick. Big books like that were the ones I was always drawn to. But I was very blessed to have a nice group of mentors who one-on-one helped me develop my work. So,
yeah. I think it has to do with people too. One of my first professors in my program, my MFA program, who was a South African poet, who had been jailed during the apartheid years, was the first to encourage me to write a book about this revolution and to overcome my trepidation about putting something that's very true and very traumatic and very tragic into a fictional form, I think. But it was also in his class that I got Tim O'Brien's The Things We Carried, and I mentioned this last night, but my ability to write my book came from an understanding of reading Tim's work and finally seeing how you can write about war, and really what I got out of that is in writing about war, what you're actually exploring are the different levels of love and the different complications that come from those two conflicting feelings in a situation. So that Tim O'Brien was, thank you.
I've been drawn since the time I was a little boy, really, and I remain so in my adulthood, drawn to stories in which, in one way or another, miracles occur, that which can't happen necessarily in the waking world we all live in. So I was drawn to Alice in Wonderland and Thumbelina and Bambi. Because I guess as a child of the Midwest and of corn, soybean country, I lived in a relentless reality of relentless boredom and monotony all around me. And by that I mean not just in a natural sense, but I mean in the Kiwanis boys sense, and holier than thou housewives, and even more holier than thou preachers, and the country club set. The kind of Midwest America of Sinclair Lewis tripled. It had gotten worse. And I yearned for the escape of the miracle. That yearning has informed my fiction. I am, by temperament and now as professionally, drawn toward not what happened, but toward what almost happened, or what could have happened, or more importantly, what should have happened. So I wrote a novel, for example, called Going After Cacciato, which was the story of a soldier in Vietnam saying, enough of this, I'm out of here, and walking to Paris, 8,600 miles. Didn't happen, but could have happened. The soldier had legs. And of course, more importantly, at least from my point of view, should have happened. You had just talked about this utterance of the word no. It's one of the most difficult things I've had to do in my life since I was a little boy, saying no to, I get on an elevator and I want to please people. And we please by affirmation, by the word yes. There are times in life when the word no is going to please you. And you wish, I'd said no to a war, and no in a lot of ways in this life. I'll finish by saying not long ago my dad died. And in the last hours, and certainly the last days of my dad's life, I could have and I should have gone to the hospital bed in which he was lying. Nothing to stop me, except the Midwest. And I didn't do it. But in a story, in fiction, miracles can happen. I can go into that room. And my dad can sit up from the dead. And he can say, that's okay. I know you love me. Well, the dead can't speak and they can't sit up. But through story, whether it's invented or wholly anchored in reality, but through story, miracles like that can occur, even in the most realistic fiction and the most realistic nonfiction. And it's that which, this isn't going back to your question, it's that which has made me a writer, that search for the miracle.
You needed your own story.
Yes.
My fellow Kentuckian has complimented me, and I would like to try to compliment her back. When people say to me, as they sometimes do, that my writing has changed their life or helped them through something, I feel complimented, of course, but I also feel a little frightened because I wouldn't presume to change anybody's life, and I didn't ever write anything to change anybody's life. I've always felt that my business as a writer was to do the best job of writing that I could do, and I didn't ever send it off saying, I bet that's going to change somebody's life. I think if something I wrote changed your life, it wasn't me or my book that did it. I think that my book spoke to something in you that changed your life. And that if you did change your life to your satisfaction, that's to your credit, and you should not give the credit to me. I've needed books all my life, and like Tim, I've sometimes needed my own. That's why I wrote them. As a country writer, I've needed the books of country writers. Thomas Hardy, Jane Austen, William Faulkner, Eudora Welty, Sarah Orne Jewett. Well, there's a whole list. I'm leaving somebody out. But, the Kentucky short story writer, James Still, who I love in person and whose work I love. He's long gone now, but his influence stays with me. I needed to have it confirmed that somebody who wasn't from New York might be able to write. But I also have literary landmarks in my mind that do for me what my Kentucky friend says books have done for her. To to prop me up, to help me out. If I even think of Odysseus going up into the hill farm when he gets back from his trip and finding his old father up there planting a tree, that confirms a lot for me. An old man planting a tree. You can see how it would fit me now. Or if I go back and read the Sermon on the Mount again, which I've done again and again, I suffer from it because it puts me down every time. But it tells me things I need to know. If I've read Light in August several times, Shakespeare, I've gone back again and again to King Lear. And what's always spoken of is the ability to go on, to stay alive, and not because of the future. I wanted to respond. I cannot respond to this issue of the future that's been brought up several times. I'd like to say something about it. The future is the most popular subject going, and nobody knows anything about it. Everybody's dwelling on it in dread or in hope. All you can say for sure about the future is that it's going to be a surprise. I was asked lately to write a short narrative of the future, and I wrote back, the future doesn't have a narrative. The future doesn't exist. And Jesus said something in the Sermon on the Mount that in the context of the popularity of the future is very funny. Take no thought for the morrow. So well, it's practically true. It's a waste of time. But when I did take this writing assignment, and I did write, I said the best thing that you can do for the future is do the right thing right now. Don't put it off for the future when you think something's going to happen that may not, and waste your time. Go ahead and do it right now. And if it's the right thing, it'll be interesting to do. So I'm feeling concerned for so many young people, wondering how they're going to live in the world of tomorrow. And all I can tell them is that they may find it extremely difficult, or they may find it possible. But it'll ask for something in them that they'll have when the time comes. So you will take thought for the tomorrow because you're weak, not very smart human beings. But you can salt it down with the idea that you're wasting your time. Find out something good to do right now.
Andrew? Thank you.
Oh, the question of influence, the anxiety of influence. I would love to have some strange, witty take on something unusual, but I've actually been influenced by many things that lots of people have been influenced by, things that I look up to. My children are now at a stage at which it's possible for me to read them books, and rereading the books of my childhood has reminded me how deeply those books influenced me. Winnie the Pooh, Alice in Wonderland, especially Carl Sandburg's Rutabaga stories, with their sense of unreality, with their strange, vivid affection for the sounds of words, with those rhythms in them that are such extraordinary rhythms, and with that element of a reality, an unreality perhaps, but that's surprising at every turn. As I got older, I think it was mostly fiction that influenced me, even though I write mostly nonfiction now, but it was the narrative structures and the storytelling of fiction. My freshman year in college, I wrote an essay about To the Lighthouse, which I called Toward the Lighthouse. And I then ended up writing an essay my sophomore year, which I also called Toward the Lighthouse. And my senior essay, which dealt in part with Virginia Woolf, I had a chapter called Toward the Lighthouse. So I sort of ran with that theme, but To the Lighthouse was an extraordinary influence on me. I had a citation recently for my book in which someone referred to it as the Middlemarch of nonfiction. And I took that as the ultimate compliment, because Middlemarch is probably my favorite novel, and it's my favorite novel because of the ability that Eliot has, like Tolstoy, who's also a favorite, but to describe a broad range of people so vividly that you never lose track of who any of them is, to have those people be absolutely real and yet to have some kind of a moral vision that shines through their experience, and to do it in a way which is uncluttered, unfussy, long, detailed, in-depth, but not in any sense reductionist or narrow. And that book really, I think, is the model. I also rather like the fact that it's a thick book, and I write thick books, and I'm not so much behind the brevity as the soul of wit school of thinking. So I've loved those books, and reading the books of my childhood curiously, I feel as though there are connections. The sort of episodic narratives of Winnie the Pooh seem to me to be borne out in the episodic narratives of Middlemarch. I also read and loved a great deal of poetry, including yours, and the poets who influenced me the most influenced me very deeply. I get asked all the time when people began to describe depression, and depression was described beautifully by Hippocrates in 500 BC, 2,500 years ago, and his description of it would serve clinical purposes today. But I also found myself going back to an Emily Dickinson poem that I memorized in 8th grade and thinking, why did I memorize it in 8th grade? But it just, I wasn't depressed then, and I'm not depressed now, I'm pleased to say, but I have been quite depressed. And I think that the process of memorizing poems is so transformative. And that poem in particular, I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading till I felt that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating till I felt my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll, as if the heavens were a bell and being were an ear, and I and silent, some strange race wrecked, solitary here. Just then, a plank in reason broke, and I fell down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. That was a big influence.
So Gilbert has to follow Emily Dickinson, which is not easy.
That's it. It's really tough. To draw inspiration, the list is sort of countless, and it's sort of as you grow and age, it becomes different. But I'll just tell you what inspires me now, and still gets me excited, is research, going into these records and finding these letters done in original hands where you can actually see how hard a person is pressing down on a piece of paper. And I have the ability to go into the Library of Congress and just sit there with letters, and one letter that particularly inspired me when I was working on this book was the story of a 14-year-old sweet-faced kid in Florida who had made the mistake of sending a Valentine card to a white girl. And her father was a town official and rounded this kid up with his father and a couple of henchmen and took him out to a river, Suwannee River, bound his hands and feet and forced him to jump in the water where he drowned as a lesson about this Valentine Day card. And this was a decade before Emmett Till, which a lot of people are familiar with the Emmett Till tragedy, but no one's heard of this particular case. And what they did then, they took the father down to the sheriff's office and they wrote out an accident report saying that the son drowned by accident. And they forced this man to sign that as a witness. And to just see his signature, where his hand is just signing that and what that signing entails. And then to see the letters that follow with these brave lawyers saying, we think he's willing to talk and tell us what really happened if he's assured of some protection because he feels his family's at danger. Why wouldn't he feel that way? And just to see those letters and then to see these brave young lawyers saying, we're going down there and we're going to fight this case. That's to me is what I draw inspiration from.
Well, we have time, I'm told, for 2 more questions, and you guys have both been standing there a long time, so I think in the order you came up, you're next.
Okay. I'm a grateful recipient of the gifts of science, but one of the reasons this session is deeply inspiring to me is that I hear words like transformative. I hear the word miracle, and I hear the word surprise. And I remember one of the books, Mr. Berry, that I much appreciate from you is Life is a Miracle, which was an extended criticism in the main of E.O. Wilson's sociobiology. My question is there any sense in which the literary impulse and the project, which all of you embody so beautifully, is at war with science or some version or other of the hegemony of science? As I said, science delivers so many gifts to all of us, but the drive toward explanation, which in some cases comes out as a theory of determinism, seems to me, at least, to be at odds with the wonderful passion for miracle and transformation that I feel when I'm in the presence of literary figures. So would you comment a little bit on how, and I'm happy to have you go first, Mr. Berry, but comment on how the literary project relates to the project of science, which is committed to explanation. Thank you.
Well, that book was written out of fear. Wilson's determinism in that book, which he couldn't establish, but his assumption that the ultimate reality was going to be revealed and determined by physics, just seemed to me to be intolerable. Well, the book involves an absurdity, if you'll allow me to say so. He feels like that the world is absolutely determined on the one hand, and on the other hand, he makes this appeal, which he consistently and continuously makes, for us to change our lives. So how, if you have no choice, if everything's hereditarily and ultimately physiologically and then physically determined, how are you going to change your life? Well, this is, I was terrified by his determinism, and I was terrified by the possibility that he could get away with that contradiction in our society now, that people would read that book and credit it and not see that it involves a fundamental contradiction that he can't resolve. First place, he can't prove his determinism. In the second place, he can't resolve the contradiction between himself as an evangelist and himself as an advocate of a kind of hopelessness. So the role of science is very worrying to me, and the way it's been used now and taught and used in the universities is worrying to me. Science is a great source of hope corporate humanity, to we incorporated humans. I mean, we just concede that this is, our problems are going to be solved by these scientists. That runs headlong into the problem that science is enriching to the wrong people. And it's highly favored. You're familiar with STEM? The emphasis given to STEM in the universities now. Science is so highly favored because it brings in a lot of money for grants. And science as an enterprise is open-ended. It's supposed to be the pursuit of truth. But nobody who's pursuing truth can be sure to what use his or her truth is going to be put by the people who've paid for it. So I'm not against knowing, which is what science is all about, knowing our world, but not to take control of it and abuse it for the sake of a hierarchy of plutocrats.
Thank you.
So there's a kind of science that I think I understand and that I'm advocating, and the example I will use, the example that I pretty thoroughly know, is that of the Land Institute, Wes Jackson's outfit out in Salina, Kansas. This is a limited science. What they're trying to do, for one thing, is develop perennial grain crops, and they have developed the first one. It's a great triumph, and it has great promise because it means that we might have grain crops that don't require disturbing the soil and the use of all these chemicals every year. So, but this is a science that's ecologically limited. There's certain things that I know those people won't do. And I don't think that they would destroy their local ecosystem or their local neighborhood and charge it off as the pursuit of truth. So the issue for me, as best I can define it now, is between a limitless and a limited science. And this speaks really to the issue of the arts, because the arts are always limited. You can't write anything, for instance, unless you have an idea of where to start. And that's a limitation right there. And then, if you really are an artist, you'll know when to stop. And that's another one. So a book makes this rather artificial election to be contained by limits that mean that its limitations mean that it won't be the answer to everything. It won't be the ultimate book. And that's why we need freedom of speech. That's why we need freedom of science, because the ultimate question is not going to be produced, or the ultimate question is not going to be answered, in spite of all this talk about the secret of the universe and the theory of theories and all that. That's future stuff.
And I just wonder if somebody has a general comment on what could be done in our community to kind of promote reading readiness, or just the quality of life for young kids. Sorry, guys.
Anybody want to comment on that? I can just very briefly, growing up, yeah, maybe I'll just say a word that I've spent my life working on literacy. It's the biggest issue, I think, in education still. You mentioned that STEM is getting so much attention now, and that's important, but if you don't learn to read, you're at a disadvantage from then on in being able to do anything else. I hope that what we're doing with technology can help, but it's only a tiny part of the problem. Research is showing that it's really parents talking to their kids that is the most important thing. And that's what I think we have to promote in every message we send out to parents, and we have to help them do it. I can go on about this for hours, but it's not the time to do it. So I'm going to let you have the last question.
How exactly you found those passions, and like what path you took to really become like dig in your field and like really get, you know, a ground or a foundation for what you want to do in your career?
I think it matters zero in terms of what you end up doing with your life. I don't think you need to worry about it. What I think you do need to worry about is how one pursues ambition or desire. Picking up on what Wendell had been talking about just a moment ago on the science question, I think what matters in the end really is a kind of humility in the pursuit of whatever we're pursuing, whether it be science or art. When it comes to war, for example, it boils down to one person saying to another person, I am so right and you are so wrong that I am going to kill you. In the end, that's it. And it's that absolutism that accompanies science and accompanies virtually everything that's bothersome. And to have us to approach the world, whatever it may be, with a sense of uncertainty, seems to me the appropriate way to conduct oneself as a human being, no matter what your endeavor. The world was once flat, and Newton was it, and Einstein rolled along. We change as human beings. The truth of things, this pursuit of truth. I mean, if the truth for you now is the truth you believed in when, say, you were 7, you're in trouble. If you still believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, at least in the same way, you're in trouble. People fall in and out of love. What was true yesterday, oh, I'm madly in love with her, may be untrue a week later, or 3 weeks later, or 10 years later. Truth is elusive and fluid, and it's not fixed and absolute. We don't reach out and grab a piece of truth and say, take a look, there's a piece of truth. It doesn't work that way. And it's that uncertainty that propels me through my life, not just as a writer, but as a person. For every declaration that can be made about anything, mine is the kind of mind that instantly seeks the contradiction. It's part of what makes me a writer and not a scientist. That's how I would whack at it.